Here's an old debate between William Lane Craig and Antony Flew. What's interesting about this debate is that it seems Craig has been using the same arguments for about 20 years. At least. He's changed very little. I'm gonna skip over the bits where he talks about the Kalam argument because you've all heard that shit a billion times.
Number one is that if God is omnipotent, then why don't things turn out as God wills? It seems to me that the answer to that question is evident, namely, God's omnipotence does not mean that he can do things that are logically impossible, but it is logically impossible to make someone freely do something. Libertarian freedom entails freedom from causal restraints. And therefore, if we are truly free and God is willed to create free creatures, then he cannot guarantee how free creatures will choose.
Craig believes that Yahweh is a free being, and I presume Craig also believes that he is incorruptibly good. If Yahweh can be both free and incorruptible, why can't he make human beings who are also free and incorruptible? If being both free and incorruptible is not a logical problem for God, why would it be a logical problem for human beings? Or are we to believe that human beings have a freedom that this supposedly omnipotent being does not have, namely the freedom to commit acts of evil? Also, I don't see why having a free will is necessarily a good thing. It seems to me that it would be far better to never have to deal with any concupiscence. In other words, it seems to me that life would be far better if we only ever wanted to do those things which were the best for ourselves and others, and to be instinctively and uncontrollably repulsed by the thought of committing any act contrary to our best interests and the best interests of others. I don't understand why a benevolent God would prefer to make free humans rather than incorruptible humans.
People freely separate themselves from God forever. It isn't that God sends people to hell. Rather, it's that people freely reject God's grace and forgiveness, and so they separate themselves from God forever.
In doing so, most people aren't knowingly choosing hell. Many of the people doing that may not even believe there is a hell. And if there really is a hell, Yahweh is allowing people to mistakenly wander into an eternity of torment. That doesn't sound like something a benevolent God would do. I think a benevolent God would abolish hell altogether, or at the very least show himself, so the only people who end up in hell are those who make a fully informed decision to reject him despite fully acknowledging his existence and knowing the consequences of rejecting him.
Second point I'd like to make is, if a person committed an infinite number of sins, then he would deserve eternal punishment. Now, no one obviously commits an infinite number of sins in this life, but what about in the afterlife? Insofar as the damned in hell continue to hate and reject God, they continue to sin, and thus they incur further punishment. And thus, in a real sense, hell is self-perpetuating rather, because the sinning goes on forever, the punishment goes on forever.
So does that mean that if a person goes to hell, then changes their mind about Yahweh, they can leave and go to heaven instead?
Thirdly, I want to suggest that there may be, in fact, a sin of infinite gravity and proportion, which does merit eternal punishment. And this would be the sin of irrevocably rejecting God and his forgiveness. It seems to me that for the creature to spit in the face of God, his creator, to reject God irrevocably, is a sin of infinite proportion and could well merit eternal punishment.
That's fucking stupid. The idea that such an offense would be worse than even starting a drunken bar fight is unconscionable to me, let alone the idea that it deserves infinite punishment.